Então, bom dia a todos e a todas, está bem? Desde logo, obrigada pela vossa presença nesta que é a nossa o nosso quarto encontro no âmbito da linha Rise. Hoje, como sabem, vamos ter a apresentação da Gea Picardi, com uma comunicação intitulada La Via Campesina Feminist Perspective from the Global to the Local, The Case of the Sindicato Labrego Galego. Eu estou a falar em português, mas imagino que a GA até vá fazer a sua apresentação em inglês, portanto vamos usar assim um híbrido, está bem, entre o português e o inglês e eventualmente algum espanhol ou algum italiano que também possa haver por aí. Se vos parecer bem, vamos então começar. Mas antes disso, GA, e antes de lhe passar a palavra, se calhar só relembrar para quem não a conhece, eventualmente, que a G é investigadora de pós-doutoramento no SES, é também investigadora no projeto europeu Green Paths, tem um doutoramento em Ciências Sociais pelo SES, que concluiu em 2024, numa tese sobre os fundamentos feministas, ecológicos e decoloniais do confederalismo democrático curdo. No fundo, a sua investigação atual centra-se nas transições ecológicas e no trabalho do cuidado a partir de perspectivas da ecologia política e economia feminista. Portanto, já sem mais demoras, eu passo-lhe a palavra, está bem? Para ouvirmos e podermos também aprender consigo.
Ok, muito obrigada, Luciana. Vou fazer esse switch ao inglês, so everybody can understand me better. Before sharing my screen, well, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you, Luciana, for the introduction, the RISE group for providing this space for sharing our researches, our ongoing researches. And so before sharing my screen, I want to say that precisely for being an ongoing research, I have changed my title and also the abstract, the main argument, etc. But the topic is still more or less the same. So now I share with you okay, I'm not super, okay, now you are probably seeing, yeah, I will put it as a presentation. See? Okay. So, yeah, the new title, as you can see, is now Mainstreaming Gender, Refusing Governance, Peasant Feminist Struggles Towards Alternative Agri-Food Systems, the case of Sindicato Labrego Galego. And this is the result of an ongoing research process that I have been carried out with Stefania Barca, who is also here with us today, and Bibiana Martinez Alvarez, who will maybe join, I don't know, for the past year. What I'm presenting today is like my latest personal development, but in any case, I will speak at the first person plural because it's completely a result of a collective study, a collective research process. So let's start. As probably many of you already know, for over 2 decades, the European Union has formally committed to gender mainstreaming as the primary tool to advance gender equality across all policy areas, including agriculture. No? A strategy that, considering the persisting gender inequalities in European agri-food system, have been considered by scholars as nothing more than a major failure. Among the main critical assessments of gender mainstreaming, there is the fact that it brought to the integration of gender equality into soft rural development programs and policies, turning attention from women as farm workers to rural women. So all women who generally live in the rural areas. A new category that came hand in hand with strategies of incorporation or empowerment of rural women in off-farm jobs as entrepreneurs, diversifiers, and service providers, functional to the maintenance of the rural world, so often reaffirming gender normative identities and the invisibilization of women's labor. Indeed, from the 19th onwards, we see growing efforts at mainstreaming gender in agriculture, and together a proliferation in the use of this category, rural women, by researchers and policy experts. And yet, one of our first empirical observations when analyzing the gender discourse of the Sindicato Labrego Galego, which, by the way, means Galician Peasant Union, representing the oldest and largest peasant union in Galicia, member of La Via Campesina with a strong feminist component. So the first empirical observation when analyzing this discourse was that rural women did not appear in its writing, in its declarations, articles. It was not used as a category of identification and self-representation. So we asked very, very simply, why? Why did the Sindicato refuse to use this category? And more generally, what does this tell us about how peasant women's movements respond to gender mainstreaming in European agriculture? So to answer this question, we bridge two different literatures which have barely communicated to each other so far. The one on gender mainstreaming in European agriculture, and the other one on La Via Campesina's feminist struggle. And we do so by bringing to the front the concept of refusal as the main lens to analyze the feminist struggle of the Sindicato in the context of current mainstreaming, gender mainstreaming in agriculture. Our argument is that by refusing certain gender constructs and strategic assumptions of such strategy, the Sindicato has not only endured for decades, avoiding cooptation and strengthening its resistance against the structural inequalities in the agri-food systems, but has also articulated alternative feminist subjectivities and gender-just agri-food models. So what I will do today is briefly presenting you these two bodies of literature, the concept of refusal, and then 3 examples of refusal that we have observed in the struggle of the Sindicato's women, followed by some final remarks regarding the potentiality of a politics of refusal to alternative, gender-just, and care-centered agri-food systems and transformations. So, for over 2 decades, feminist scholars have critically examined gender mainstreaming in rural and agricultural policies, including in Europe, and specifically in the Common Agricultural Policy, the CAP. Scholars have shown that the gender mainstreaming is not the solution it claims to be. Instead, functions following Foucault's theory of governmentality as a technique of government, which creates gender constructs and establishes rationalities of government that define specific problems and solutions that, of course, are not neutral, but oriented by specific interests. Let me give you 3 key findings from this literature. First, gender mainstreaming, while emerging as a feminist strategy to include the gender equality concerns in policy field, it ended up evaporating feminist contents. When it hits national local bureaucracy and technocratic top-down approaches, feminist goals are depoliticized, watered down, or simply ignored. Second, gender mainstreaming reproduces the gender divisions of labors. When adopted at the end of the 90s, beginning of 2000, it brought, as I was saying before, to the incorporation of gender equality issues in soft areas of rural development, leaving untouched hard laws connected to agricultural welfare, income, and subsidies. So rural women were being reconstructed in this narrative, from farming assistants, as they were considered before, let's say, into rural entrepreneurs, service providers, steering them into off-farm occupations or diversifying on-farm activities. And this, as I was saying before, has reproduced hierarchical divisions of labors and like identities that confirm masculine domination. Third, gender mainstreaming co-opts feminist language for neoliberal ends, focusing on individual entrepreneurship, efficiency, and productivity. Gender equality become a box to tick, and the structural problems, so land ownership, unpaid care work, patriarchal family farms, remain untouched. In short, it does not challenge the capitalist patriarchal political economy of agri-food systems. It integrates women into unjust systems rather than transforming those systems. And yet, little attention has been paid into how peasant feminists struggle, navigate, and respond to this technique of government. So, the other literature is on La Via Campesina and La Via Campesina feminist struggle. As you probably know, La Via Campesina is probably the biggest transnational peasant movement in which the Sindicato is a member and has articulated food sovereignty as a radical alternative to corporate agriculture. For decades, scholars have addressed the evolution of La Via Campesina gender equality struggle, pointing to popular peasant feminism as its new ongoing political horizon, that summarizing some scholars and literature on this topic does three things. First, it distances itself from liberal urban upper-class feminism. It affirms a class-based perspective. Second, it aims at deconstructing gender roles and overcoming the gender division of labor. And third, it centers care for others, for the environment, at the heart of a good life. The literature on, can you still see the presentation?
Yes.
Yeah,
No.
see,
Now it's black.
now it's black.
Also mine. How can I do now?
Now
Okay.
it appeared.
Now it's back.
Okay, now it's back. So the literature on La Via Campesina has stressed how this movement has always maintained a strong autonomy, no, versus international institution of agri-food governance, engaging in negotiations, but also imposing and defending its perspective, its own language and alternative. In this sense, popular peasant feminism has been characterized as shifting from a struggle for gender rights to an anti-capitalist, anti-patriarchal intersectional struggle. Yet its politics have largely been framed as those of contestation, no, and resistance, a characterization that only partially captures its nature. Popular peasant feminism does not just say no to corporate agriculture or patriarchal governance, it says also yes to alternative worlds without waiting for recognition or for the state to change. So on one end, the gender mainstreaming critique, no, tell us how it operates as a critique, as a technique of government, but barely address and theorize how peasant feminist movements respond to it. And on the other side, the literature on La Via Campesina celebrates the alternatives built by the peasant movement and popular peasant feminism, no? Its radicality, its prefigurative power, but it lacks a critical vocabulary for characterizing a politics that, when confronting ongoing gender governance, goes beyond resistance and opposition. That doesn't not say we want more empowerment for rural women. It simply rejects to adopt this category, no? As we said at the beginning. So what is missing for us is a concept that captures the political practice of rejecting the terms of governance while engaging in resistance, negotiation, and prefiguration. So this concept for us is the concept of refusal. The literature on refusal is large. I will not enter into details. I will focus on our understanding of refusal, which is based on Eliot-Pratt-Freeman conceptualization and on feminist theorizations of refusal. So first, following Pratt-Freeman, resistance is typically directed at sovereign power, no, demanding rights, opposing policies, rioting against the police, while refusal, by contrast, respond to governmental regulation, rejecting the categories, subject positions, and logics through which governance operates. And yet, he says they mutually assist each other. They are not opposed. They work together in what he calls a politics of maneuver. And second, following feminist scholars, refusal is for us affirmative. It's not merely negative. As they write, affirmative refusal needs imagination to go beyond the suspensive gesture of preferring not to. Refusal says no to dominant governance and simultaneously say yes to alternative worlds. So it's not a rejection of resistance, it's a political practice that operates alongside resistance, strengthening it and pointing to alternative subjectivities, relations, and way of life. So based on what I present until now, we ask how and why peasant women's movement mobilized refusal when confronting gender agricultural governance, and how does it relate to their resistance and the prefiguration of alternative agri-food systems. To answer this question, our work draws on the case studies of the Sindicato Labrego Galego, which, as I said, no, it's one of the leading peasant organizations within the European La Via Campesina, which has not only battled against CAP's policies for food sovereignty, for agroecology, but especially thanks to the work of its women's secretariat, it has made the struggle for gender equality one of its strategic pillars, no, for transforming agri-food system. And this study is mainly based on our critical discourse analysis of FOSE, which is the bi-monthly journal of the Sindicato Labrego Galego. And we focused on the last 5 years, analyzing nearly 30 FOSE's numbers, but we also addressed many other declarations and documents released by the union and its women secretariats since the 90s. And we complemented this analysis with 3 semi-structured interviews with female leaders of the Sindicato that have been made by Viviana Martinez Alvarez, and also with participant observation in events and encounters organized by the Sindicato by Stefania Barca and Viviana. So through this analysis, 3 main acts of refusal have emerged. So our first finding is what we call the refusal to identify with the category of rural women. When we ask Lidia Serra, who is a leader of the Sindicato Labrego Galego, about the condition of rural women in Galicia, we use this term without knowing the implications of the category, she replied, "Rural women doesn't mean anything. In a rural world, we live a lot of women, each one with its profession. So when people talk to me about rural women, I do not understand what they are talking about. This story of rural women is a story made to divide us, promoted at that time by an agricultural international organization which responded to the mandate of conservative interests, which had a kind of right-wing idea of women's role. So when we say rural women, I don't know what they are talking about. We understand our women's struggle as the struggle of Labregas, peasant women. So while the absence of rural women in the Sindicato's writings implicitly showed a refusal of this category, Lidia Serra here explicitly refused it, pointing to the conservative interests, as she said, behind its adoption. What Serra is likely referring to is what the literature describes as the depoliticization of gender equality demands, when in the 90s, 2000, they entered the policy domain strongly influenced by patriarchal interest of agribusiness. According to Elizabeth Prugler, this depolitization shifted the focus of feminist organizations away from women's professional rights as farmers, such as land rights, joint ownership, social security, etc., and toward, as we say, empowerment and as entrepreneurs and service providers. But what Prugler didn't see, probably, is that not all peasant feminist organizations easily accepted this shift. The struggle of the Sindicato's women started in the 80s and 90s precisely to defend the Labregas professional rights as farmers, since most of them were, and many still are, legally considered as family helpers, not workers, so deprived from any kind of labor right. When gender mainstreaming entered the policy domain, the Sindicato did not identify in the new normative constructs proposed by gender agricultural governance, and at the same time affirmed Labregas not just a sociological category, but political one, and reinforce what I call a collective process of subjectivation as mulheres labregas feministas, feminist peasant women. So this affirmative refusal allows the Sindicato to maintain and strengthen its historical struggle for both the recognition of women, of peasant women's labor as farm work, and for the redistribution of subsidies. In the 2010 Joint Declaration of Cáceres, that was signed up by the Sindicato, among others organizations, against the CAP, they state, "We are tired of the invisibilization to which current agricultural policies subject us, policies that consider women who carried out our work on family farms as another piece of property belonging to the farm holder." So while this struggle brought to the approval of a co-titling law in 2011 in Spain, which enables women to get legal status as co-holder of the farmer activity and therefore to get labor rights and CAP subsidies, the Sindicato continues to resist its limits. Women still need male consent to obtain this titling. Bureaucracy, they say, is overwhelming. Implementation is barely zero. And nobody, they say, cares about it, from administration to male partners. So, I mean, they keep denouncing the fact that there are thousands of women, this is a declaration from 2021, of women producers who are not farm managers, not holders, do not receive cap payments, and are not receiving pensions equal to men's. And second, this refusal enables them to strengthen their autonomous collective agency. So instead of relying on individual empowerment, the Sindicatos women built up their own collective power within and outside the union. So they produce their own category of identification and imaginative prefigurative practices of collective organization. Our second finding is what we call the refusal to grow. And this refers to the Sindicatos' rejection of the assumption that peasant women's small-scale farms are a weakness to be overcome through expansion, depth, and entrepreneurial mimicry of a masculine productivist model. Ana Rodriguez, who is a policy expert of the Sindicato, explains, and I'm reading here. What the ministry's own documents says is, women have the smallest farms, but they classify them as less profitable, with fewer investments, little debt, and all of this was presented as a weakness. What they tell you is, let's see if you grow, because you are small, you don't generate much rural employment. In response, the women's secretariats of the Sindicato wrote to the ministry in 2021, small-scale models are presented as weakness when in fact they are a strength. This is a refusal of what Farrell and Rickards call the deficit narrative. So the idea that women farmers lack productivity, credit, scale, and must be made, they say, more like men. So the Sindicato refused this. Instead, they defend what they call a women's models of small-scale agroecological farming. As they write, the model represented by women's farm doesn't need to change. The farm model represented by the current CAP needs to change. And yet this refusal does not romanticize poverty nor the innate attribute of women to care. No? The Sindicato is aware that this women's model first is rendered precarious by the CAP's hectare-based payments, for which the bigger the farm, the more subsidies you receive. Second, is embedded in unequal gender divisions of reproductive labor. As Fosse explains, women's small farms are smaller also because women carry the triple workload, productive, reproductive, and community political work, so lacking time for any other kinds of activities. Maria Ferrero, head of the Women's Secretariats, insists that placing life at the center of agri-food systems means breaking the construction of sexual roles that assign women the invisible reproductive sphere and men the sphere of work. So fighting for public policy, where I'm quoting Fosse, every person and therefore women's life is in the center, and where care work is visible and a priority, is crucial for the Sindicato. As Lydia Serla told us, even though women may work individually in models closer to agroecology, without public policy, it leads to tremendous precarity. These models, as they stand today, are fine as resistance projects, but they are not getting us anywhere. Any policy must come hand in hand with the recognition of women's rights. So refusal here does not replace the resistance. The Sindicato continue to demand redistributive cap payments, fair prices, public care infrastructures, and policies that support small-scale farming. But refusal ensures that these demands are not co-opted into a logic that would abolish the women's models rather than transform the system. The third refusal does not target specific objects, so an identity or a model, but the very architecture of gender governance. So the assumption that justice can be achieved by fixing homogeneous identities into fragmented administrative boxes. So gender divided from labor, divided from migration, divided from sexuality, and addressing them separately. As scholars like Nira Yuval Davis argues, this addictive approach to identity creates like parallel policy silos, competing hierarchy of oppression and paralyzed emancipation. The Sindicato implicitly refused this logic. Its central political subjectivity, Mulheres Labregas Feministas, is not a narrow identity claim. It is the basis for transversal alliances across gender, race, age, sexuality, etc., and mostly anchored in common political goals. Conchi Mongo Alonso, a Sindicato activist, articulated this clearly when addressing the struggle for migrant women in agriculture. She said, we need allies in feminism because 99 out of 100 people who work in the red berries are migrant women. We need environmental allies because agribusiness has a huge impact on the environment. We need allies in trade unions for the rights of women's workers in agribusiness. We need allies in the health sector. We need that peasant organizations around the world ally with each other because many people who migrated were peasants in the countries of origin. What we need most is to work together. So this quotation shows both the Sindicato's ongoing struggle for the rights of migrant women in the agro-industry, a category and an exploitation that is completely invisibilized in CAP agricultural policies, but it also shows the Sindicato transversal solidarity politics, no? That materialize, for example, in an open day called Agricology or Barbarism in 2002, hosted by the Sindicato, where the speakers addressed the agro-industrial model through multiple perspectives, through peasant agriculture, women's rights, environmental destruction, racism, migrant labor, border violence, land grabbing, global warming, etc. It also materialized this perspective, this transversal solidarity in delegations and political campaigns for migrant workers' rights, but also it extended transnationally through its engagement in the global popular peasant feminist movement. And for example, in the World March of Women, the Sindicato has connected its anti-extractivist struggle with that of women environmental defenders in Latin America, or with Palestinian women under genocide, framing feminist agroecology as resistance against colonial occupation. Moreover, as a response to the homogeneous and binary category of women, the Sindicato has built alliances with the rural and urban LGBTQ+ struggle, framing its resistance against both neoliberal capitalism and heteropatriarchy. As Isabel Villalba, the General Secretary of the Sindicato, says, thanks to the feminist struggle, we have seen that women's rights or LGBTQ rights are just as important to us as other struggles like demanding fair price, because one way or another, with each one of them, we are defending people's lives and dignity. And finally, refusing fragmentation for the Sindicato, it means to demand CAP reforms that integrate social criteria, what is called the social conditionality, through comprehensive lens that simultaneously address labor rights, migrant rights, and gender rights. So having in mind, sorry, I'm taking a lot of time, I'm concluding. Having in mind our main question, I will sum up some of the main results. So first, confronting gender agricultural governance, the women of the Sindicato refuse an identity, rural women, that would once again make their agricultural work invisible by placing them in a gender position as carer and service providers. An emancipatory solution, so becoming entrepreneurs, large-scale, in-depth, that is rooted in the reaffirmation of the existing growth-oriented and male-dominated model, and a siloed and administrative approach that prevents to see and fight the intersecting systems of oppression and exploitation that characterize agro-industrial models, both locally and globally. Instead, what they do is reaffirm their identity as labregas, peasant women and workers, as well as their own women's model, no? The small-scale agri-food model, which is already practiced by thousands of women in Galicia and across Europe, while in very precarious conditions. So they defend this model for its caring relationship with the land, with food, and with the ecosystem, pointing to the construction of transversal alliances with multiple subjects across the agri-food chain, no? As the only way to defend this model and to combat injustice. And three, this allowed them to strengthen their resistance from a different ground of negotiation and different subject position, demanding rights and recognition of their work and of their model, as well as redistributive policy, becomes a radical practice, one that does not seek inclusion, does not accept predefined categories, but instead aims to depatriarchalize the current agri-food system and the policies that govern it. So our analysis is, of course, not exhaustive, and more importantly, it's just, I mean, it's a work in progress, as I say. The Sindicato's feminist struggle is a living practice, and we have only begun to map the contours of its politics of refusal. Nevertheless, the study suggests that centering refusal offers a powerful angle for rethinking gender equality in agriculture, moving beyond gender mainstreaming, and for better understanding the potential of peasant feminist movements to build agri-food transformation, so eventually contributing to both literature. Aiuto. The Sindicato's refusal represents for us both a feminist and an agroecological gesture. It shows not only that agribusiness is patriarchal, but also that, willing or not, the solution produced by gender mainstreaming are as well. And for this very reason, both work against an alternative, sustainable agri-food model that is already been in place. Refusing such governance is therefore a way to defend, recognize, and support that model, subvert structural inequalities, and imagine more just and care-centered path for agri-food transformation. Thank you.